The grand crystal palace of the Valari Empire sparkled under the shifting radiance of three synchronized suns, its towering spires casting long, prismatic reflections across a crowded floor of thousands of arrogant alien nobles. They had gathered from across the stars to celebrate the upcoming coronation of Princess Lyana, a historic event meant to solidify the Empire's dominance over the civilized sectors. Moving quietly among the shimmering silk robes, floating light drones, and glittering jewelry was John, a 40-year-old human working as a low-level starship mechanic. With his fading brown hair, tired eyes, and a grease-stained jumpsuit that smelled faintly of hydro-fluid, he stood out as a complete anomaly. To the high-born Valari, humans were nothing more than a fragile, primitive species hailing from a distant, volatile corner of the galaxy. John preferred their ignorance. It allowed him to exist entirely in the background, out of sight and out of mind. He kept his head down, focused on repairing a flickering hologram projector near the edge of the pavilion, and quickly retreated into the deepest shadows at the back of the grand hall. For years, he had mastered the art of blending into the furniture, finding a strange kind of peace in being utterly forgotten by a universe that had once taken everything from him. The laughter of the elites echoed around him, a constant reminder of the rigid social hierarchy that placed his kind at the very bottom. Yet, John felt no resentment, only a desire to finish his shift, collect his meager credits, and return to the quiet solitude of his workshop. He watched the grand spectacle with detached curiosity, knowing that his presence was tolerated only because the palace machinery required a skilled hand to keep running. The massive silver doors of the throne room suddenly flew open with a resounding, echoing boom that silenced the bustling crowd instantly. Thousands of conversations died mid-sentence as Princess Lyana stepped onto the long, crimson velvet carpet, flanked by elite royal guards clad in heavy, ceremonial armor. This was her first public appearance in 3 long, agonizing years, having been hidden away in deep, uncharted space for her own protection following the infamous Siege of Oros-Prime. The nobles watched her with profound reverence, their eyes wide as they whispered about the legendary, armor-clad, Deathworlder demon, who had single-handedly broken that brutal siege to save her life before vanishing into thin air. Lyana walked with a rigid grace, her posture immaculate, though her youthful features bore the subtle weight of past trauma. The rumors surrounding her rescue had grown into mythic proportions over the years, with many claiming the savior was a bioengineered mercenary or an ancient galactic spirit. The palace officials had spent a small fortune trying to track down the mysterious entity, but every lead had gone cold, leaving behind only fractured security logs and campfire tales. As she advanced toward the high dais where her mother, the queen, awaited, the atmosphere in the room grew heavy with anticipation. This coronation was not just a political transition, it was a symbol of survival and resilience for an empire that had come perilously close to total collapse. Lyana's gaze remained fixed forward, ignoring the bowing dignitaries who lined her path, her mind seemingly miles away from the opulence surrounding her. As Princess Lyana ascended the marble steps toward the throne, her large, expressive violet eyes instinctively scanned the massive sea of alien dignitaries and royal guests. Halfway up the carpet, her footsteps faltered, her boot freezing against the polished stone. She stopped completely, her gaze locking onto the far back corner of the room, far past the rows of glittering aristocracy. The vibrant blue color drained from her face, leaving her pale, and her hands began to tremble violently against her formal silk robes. The grand orchestra dropped its notes in confusion, and thousands of nobles turned their heads in unison, trying to see what had caused the future ruler of the empire to stop dead in her tracks. Whispers broke out like a sudden wave, breaking the carefully orchestrated solemnity of the event. The royal guards instantly tightened their grip on their plasma halberds, scanning the crowd for any sign of an assassination attempt or a hidden threat. The queen leaned forward from her throne, her brow furrowed in deep concern, calling out to her daughter in a hushed, urgent tone. But Lyana did not hear her mother, her entire universe had shrunk down to a single point in the distance. To the onlookers, she appeared to be staring at a blank stretch of wall, completely unprompted by any visible danger. The tension in the room thickened until the air felt heavy enough to choke, everyone waiting for the princess to break her terrifying trance. Ignoring her mother's frantic hand gestures and the royal attendants who stepped forward in panicked concern, Princess Lyana abruptly turned away from the throne. She bypassed the grand generals, the foreign ambassadors, and the high-ranking ministers, walking directly toward the servants' quarters at the very back of the hall. The crowd parted in stunned, breathless confusion as the elegantly dressed princess, adorned in royal jewels, marched purposefully toward the dim shadows. She stopped right in front of John, who was currently holding a heavy hydro wrench and trying his absolute best to look like an inanimate part of the architecture. John felt the collective gaze of thousands of powerful beings slam into his back, a cold sweat breaking out across his neck as he realized his cover was entirely blown. He kept his eyes lowered, hoping desperately that she was simply looking for someone behind him, but her footsteps stopped directly in front of his boots. Tears welled in her violet eyes, reflecting the bright chandeliers above, as she looked intently at his worn, rugged face and the graying hair at his temples. The contrast between the two was stark, a royal heir in pristine silk and a human laborer covered in carbon scoring and engine grease. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching out until the entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. The silence within the crystal palace was absolute as the princess finally gasped out the words that echoed sharply off the high, vaulted ceilings, "Mom. That's him, the Deathworlder who broke the siege alone." For a single, frozen second, nobody in the room dared to breathe, the weight of her declaration crashing into the assembly like a physical blow. Then, a booming, mocking laugh shattered the quiet, originating from High General Vale, who stepped forward with his multiple eyes crinkling in absolute derision. "Your Highness, you are surely mistaken," Vale sneered, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured toward the human. "This is a fragile, primitive Terran mechanic, a common laborer who sweeps our floors and fixes our lights." The demon of Oros-Prime wore heavy, high-impact kinetic armor and tore through reinforced titanium hulls with bare hands. "This pathetic creature can barely handle our planet's standard gravity without tiring." The other nobles began to chuckle nervously, murmurs of agreement rippling through the front rows as they looked at John's unimposing frame. He didn't look like a legendary warrior. He looked like a tired man who had spent too many years working under bad lighting. John felt the sting of their insults, but he remained perfectly still, his expression carefully masked to reveal absolutely nothing to the hostile audience. As the general continued his public mockery, John's mind involuntarily slipped backward, pulled by the gravity of a horrific day 3 long years ago on the isolated colony world of Oros-Prime. A ruthless syndicate of cybernetic raiders had breached the primary royal bunker, and the vaunted, heavily armed royal guard had fled in a wave of blind terror. John had been stationed in the lower maintenance bays when the crimson alarm lights began to wail, signaling the imminent slaughter of everyone inside. He didn't have access to military-grade weaponry, advanced plasma rifles, or personal energy shielding. All he had at his disposal was a heavy-duty, reinforced industrial mining suit designed specifically to withstand deep earth cave-ins and crushing tectonic pressure. He had grabbed a heavy plasma cutting torch, a tool meant for slicing through dense asteroid veins, and stepped directly into the breach. He remembered the smell of ozone, the deafening roar of explosions, and the absolute certainty that he was going to die. But as he looked through the viewscreen of his mining suit and saw a terrified child cornered by machines, something ancient and survival-driven took over his mind, overriding every instinct to flee. To the fragile, low-gravity alien species that dominated the Galactic Cooperative, Earth was officially classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a volatile planet of extreme evolutionary hostility. The intense atmospheric pressure, unpredictable weather patterns, and crushing gravity of his home planet meant that John's natural bone density and muscle mass were supernatural by galactic standards. Inside the heavy mining suit, which acted as an exoskeleton, John became a terrifying force of pure, unadulterated kinetic destruction. He didn't shoot at the cybernetic raiders, instead, he used his raw physical strength to slam his entire body through their defensive lines, shattering their delicate alloy frames with his bare hands. The raiders, accustomed to the elegant, energy-based warfare of high-gravity worlds, had no tactical response for a creature that simply threw high-velocity mass at them. John moved like a battering ram, using his plasma torch to weld defensive bulkheads shut behind him, trapping the enemy forces in choke points while ignoring the plasma fire that scorched his outer plating. His heart hammered against his ribs, his lungs burning as he dragged heavy air into his chest, fueled by the sheer desperation of a species born in fire and mud. During the chaotic, final moments of the siege, the colony's central reactor core suffered a critical breach, threatening to experience a catastrophic meltdown that would vaporize the sector. John had thrown himself directly into the highly irradiated chamber, using the mechanical arms of his failing suit to manually hold the melting thermal shields in place. The heat had been unimaginable, melting the sensor arrays on his helmet and boiling the hydraulic fluid in his limbs until the automated backup systems finally reset. When the smoke and steam finally cleared, his industrial armor suffered a total, catastrophic structural failure, splitting open down the center. As automated medical drones rushed into the room to drag his collapsed, semi-conscious body away to an unmarked transport, a terrified 5-year-old Princess Lyana had looked down at him from her hiding spot. For just 3 brief, chaotic seconds, before darkness claimed him entirely, she had peered through his shattered visor and memorized his tired, kind eyes. He had vanished into the logistics network before anyone could ask his name, leaving behind a ruined suit of armor and a legend that would haunt the Empire for years to come. Back in the grand, shimmering throne room, John offered a polite, incredibly tired smile and tried to shake his head to dismiss the attention. "I'm afraid the General is entirely right, Your Highness. I am just a mechanic who fixes starships and mends wires. You have the wrong man," he said, his voice level and entirely devoid of pride. But Princess Lyana did not step back, nor did she allow the crowd's skepticism to sway her conviction. Instead, she reached out with a steady hand and gently took his rough, calloused forearm, firmly pulling back the sleeve of his faded blue jumpsuit. The entire court gasped in unison, several nobles recoiling as a collective murmur of shock erupted through the hall. Etched deeply into the tanned flesh of his arm was a horrific, glowing silver burn scar that formed the exact, unmistakable geometric pattern of an Oros-Prime reactor shield. It was a permanent, unreplicable mark left behind by intense thermal radiation, a brand that could only exist on the one person who had stood inside the failing core and survived. General Vale's jaw dropped, his multi-eyed gaze darting between the scar and the quiet man who bore it. The High General's ceremonial weapon clattered loudly against the polished floor, his lifelong arrogance completely shattered in an instant. "If you are truly that apex warrior," Vale whispered in absolute, trembling disbelief, "why are you hiding here sweeping floors and fixing pipes? Why did you never claim the billions in royal bounty?" John looked down at the princess, who was smiling through her tears, and his rough, scarred face softened into a gentle, unassuming expression. He shrugged his shoulders simply and replied, "Because I didn't do it for a medal or a mountain of credits, General. I was just the mechanic on duty that day. And where I come from, when a child is screaming for help in the dark, you don't check the radar to see if the odds are in your favor. You just fix the problem." As his words settled over the Grand Hall, a profound shift occurred within the Empire. The High General, followed closely by the Queen and every single noble in the assembly, slowly dropped to one knee, bowing deeply to the quiet human in the grease-stained jumpsuit, finally recognizing the true strength of a Deathworlder. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe my channel.